Today we're going to talk about direct boxes. We're going to talk about what they are, why they are important, especially for bass players, and then also why they can be vastly different in price. There can be, you can get like a $50 direct box, you could get like a $2,000 direct box. So what are you actually getting when you're paying more money for a direct box, and is it actually worth it? I'm not going to tell you that. That's going to be up to you. But I do want to talk about these and what they're doing and why they're important. This is actually part one of a two-part video series. This one's going to be a little more basic overview, technical understanding of what's happening on a basic level. And I think this is important, so bear with me on this one. But I'm really excited about a video I have coming up soon where we're going to do a blind test where we listen to a bunch of different really good direct boxes, and you can decide for yourself if you think the value is there for some of the more expensive ones. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So if you haven't subscribed yet, please do subscribe because I don't want you to miss that one. So that one's coming up. But today we're just going to talk about what they do, why they're important, and don't lose me here because I know this isn't the most fun or exciting thing to talk about. This is kind of technical, but I think it's something that if you're serious about your music as a bass player, this is a tool that is important to you. This is actually one of your most important tools, in my opinion, outside of your bass. Because what this is doing is this is making sure that your sound is your sound, that your sound gets safely to its destination. It's a very important part of your signal chain, and you should understand the basics of what this thing is doing. Okay? So bear with me. This video is not like the sexiest video. We're talking about direct boxes, but it's important. If you're serious about this as a musician, you need to understand some of this fundamental stuff with the tech. So we're going to go into that a little bit today, but bear with me. The fun stuff is coming up. We can compare them here in the next video. So please subscribe. Okay, now we're going to jump in and talk about what a direct box is and what it's actually doing. So in its most basic form, a direct box is doing two main things. The first thing is it's converting an unbalanced signal to a balanced signal. And then the second thing is it's converting a high impedance instrument level signal to a lower impedance microphone level signal. Okay, so let's talk about those two things real quick. We're starting to get into some of this technical stuff. It's actually not that bad. Just bear with me, okay? So unbalanced to balanced, what does that mean? So an unbalanced cable, you're probably pretty familiar with. Looks like your standard instrument cable, the kind of cable that's going to go from your bass to your amplifier. Very important cable, lovely cable. These are great, we use them all the time. The problem with these cables is the longer they get, the noisier they get because they're starting to introduce some hum and interference from the outside. It has to do, I'm not going to get into like the science of why that happens, but what you need to know is that the longer this cable gets, the less usable it becomes, right? So if you plugged your bass into an amplifier that was like 200 feet away, when your signal got to the amplifier 200 feet away, it would no longer sound like the signal that you're sending because you're introducing all of this gross outside interference, right? What a balanced signal does, or what a balanced signal ensures, is that you can run a balanced cable a much longer distance without it becoming a problem. So this is helping out your audio engineer, making sure that your signal is getting safely to the board. Typically, we're dealing with XLR cables like this, the ones that have the 3 pins inside, this sort of industry standard, usually the sort of balanced cable that we're talking about, right? So the first thing the direct box does is it takes your instrument cable that's unbalanced, then it goes in here, and then it comes out the other side as a balanced signal that can go much longer distance. Okay, so that's the first basic thing that a direct box does. So the second thing that a direct box is doing is it's changing the impedance, right? So and what that means, again, I'm not an engineer here. I'm talking about this from a musician's perspective. We're basically making the signal not as hot. The signal that's going out of your bass is a pretty loud, powerful signal. And what this is doing is it's knocking that signal down to the same sort of signal that a microphone is going to be at. And that's helpful to your audio engineer because all of the signals that are hitting the board are roughly at the same level. It makes it a lot easier for them to balance things because they're all sort of in the same ballpark, as opposed to one signal that's hitting the board being super hot. one of them being much lower, sort of brings all of the signals to the same ballpark gain, and it makes them a lot easier to balance. So those two things are both things that are assisting and helping your audio engineer. I almost think of like a good direct box is like, let's say you made a birthday present for someone that you care about and you mailed it to them and it's very fragile. You would want to put it in a really good shipping container and you'd want to insure it, right? You wouldn't want to just put it in like a dumpy cardboard box, because when this thing that you made got to your friend, it would be broken, right? A direct box is like a really high quality shipping container that's insured. This is ensuring that your signal, your bass sound that you have spent so much time and energy into perfecting, when it gets to the destination, the ears of the listeners, it still sounds like you, and it's still the same thing that you were so careful about. So that's why this is an important piece of gear, especially for a bass player. This is making sure that your bass sound is your bass sound when it gets to the people that are actually listening to it. I love amplifiers, don't get me wrong. I have a tube amp right there. It's one of my favorite sounds in the world. I use amps as often as I can. But the reality is, for the electric bass player, sometimes you don't have the luxury of using an amplifier. I find situations where I don't get to use my amplifier. What are some of those common situations? Maybe you're flying internationally, you can't bring your amp, and you get to the gig and the amp that is there is not good. So then is your sound dictated by a microphone on an amp that sounds bad? Or are you going to use a direct box? It's something that you have control over, right? If you take your own direct box with you, you can ensure your sound a little bit. You can ensure that the sound that you're sending, the sound that you want, is the sound that people are hearing, right? So sometimes you don't have access to a good amp if you're traveling, or sometimes you're on a stage that's too big, right? Maybe you're in a stage where there's thousands of people, there's a massive PA system, and there's huge subwoofers. The sound that people are actually hearing is probably going to be more the direct box sound than the amplifier sound. The amplifier might be more of just a stage monitor for you to hear yourself, but the sound engineer, chances are they're probably using the XLR cable in the direct box. Maybe it's a direct box that's built into your amplifier, but it's still a direct box. My preference is that you would do both a direct box and the amp signal, and blend them together. But sometimes you don't have the luxury of that, right? The reason is you're introducing bleed. So let's say you're recording live in a studio where the bass amp is in the same room as the drums. So then all of the drum tracks have the bass sound in it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a little bit of bleed, but some engineers don't like that. Maybe there's a problem with inputs. Maybe you only have like 8 inputs on a board, and you don't have the luxury of both your amp and the direct box. Maybe your engineer doesn't want bleed on stage, right? Maybe you're using in-ear monitors and you don't need to use stage volume, right? There's a lot of gigs where that's the context. If the engineer doesn't want to have your amp in the room when they're trying to capture something, if you're arguing against them, I think you're being selfish. These are my opinions that I'm sharing here. But the point that I'm trying to get across is, for the bass player, sometimes you don't have the luxury of using an amplifier. And when that happens, if you have a direct box that you like, you're ensuring that your sound is still your sound. And it's something that you do have control over. So I believe that the direct box is one of the most important pieces of equipment that a bass player can have, right up there with your amplifier. Because at the end of the day, there's a good chance that what people are actually hearing in either live or the recording, the sound that the people are actually hearing is the sound that has passed through the direct box and maybe not through the amp. Or maybe it's both, but very rarely is it just the amp. It's usually a combination of amp and direct box, or just direct box. So what I'm getting at here is the importance of this piece of equipment. It's something that I think you need to be aware of and know what it's doing. And it's something that I think you should consider owning a quality direct box. I'm not going to tell you which one. You decide that for yourself. But I do think having one is an important piece of gear for the bass player to have in their arsenal. Okay, so there's a few extra buttons on a direct box. What are they doing? Let's talk about a few of the common ones. So one of them's a ground. See this one here, ground? If you have a hum, you can hit that ground button and that's going to remove the hum. It's very practical. It actually happens a lot where you can have grounding problems. Another thing is here's a pad. See, it says 15 dB pad. This is knocking down your signal again, right? So we already took an instrument level signal and reduced it to a mic level signal. But then let's say you have a super hot signal that's just slamming this thing. You can hit that pad and that's going to reduce the signal even more. And what that's doing is it's making that signal manageable for the engineer, right? Where it's not too hot, it's not peaking, it's knocking it down, and it's manageable for them to mix with. Another thing, see this one that says reverse 180? That has to do with phase. That might be its own video, but basically there can be a problem where sound waves can sort of cancel each other out. Let's say you have two signals, right? Let's say we have this bass amp mic'd up, and we also have the direct box signal, and they're both going into the mixing console. There's a problem that could happen where the sound waves are canceling each other out, and you're reducing your low end and making the bass sound bad. The combination of the two bass signals together sounds bad. You hit that phase button, you can invert one of the signals and remove that problem. These are examples of some of the features that direct boxes can have, and they all have to do with the same concept of making sure that when your signal gets to its destination, it sounds good and it sounds clean and it's not buzzing and it's not humming and it's not too loud and it's not too soft. It's just solid. Okay, so what makes one direct box more expensive or better than another? And this is starting to get sort of subjective. There's a lot of opinions involved. I'm not going to share my opinion so much, but I'm going to tell you what I understand. A big part of the cost of these has to do with their components, right? It's like a cheaper direct box would be like $100 or less. This is still relatively affordable. This is a radial direct box, the JDI. It's $230 new. This one, it actually has, I don't know if you can see this, it says Jensen equipped. Jensen equipped, what does that mean? It means that inside of here is a Jensen transformer. So what's a transformer? A transformer, I'm not an electrical engineer, but a transformer is the thing that's actually doing the work in here, the thing that's actually changing the voltage. A big part of the cost difference between direct boxes has to do with which transformer is in here. Different transformers, they can handle different level signals. They have different transparency. So like a really good transformer is part of what you're paying for. I love this direct box because it's simple, it's reliable, and it has a great transformer in it, and it's $230, right? But what's the difference between this direct box and this direct box? Well, the short answer is about $1,000. This is like $1,180. I don't actually own one of these. I'm borrowing this, and I'm curious to see if I think it's worth it. We're going to do that in the next video. But what's the difference between these? Well, they're doing the same thing, right? They're both converting an unbalanced signal to a balanced signal, and they're also both changing the impedance from an instrument level signal to a mic level signal. But this is just making sure that we get there safely. Whereas this is also a preamplifier. It's also got EQ. It's also got a power supply. It's also got tubes in there. So this is more of a tone shaping, tone coloring device, right? So this isn't just making sure that our signal gets there safely. It's also changing our signal a good bit along the way. And that's where you start to get into the cost of these like boutique direct boxes. You're not just doing the basic things that direct box does, you're adding features. Is it worth it? I can't answer that for you. What I am excited about is this next video that's coming up, where I'm going to take a number of different direct boxes and I'm going to get a bunch of friends to listen to them, not knowing what they are, and they're going to pick their favorites. And I think that'll be interesting. So, like I said, subscribe if you haven't subscribed, because that video is coming. All right, so what did we learn today? We learned the DirectBox's device is converting an unbalanced signal to a balanced signal, and it's converting a high impedance instrument output to a lower impedance microphone output. At the core, it's a device, or a tool, really, that is helpful to your recording engineer and to you, because it's helping you get your sound safely to its destination. A lot of times direct boxes have a few additional features. The typical ones are your ground, which is going to help reduce a hum, your phase or your polarity button, which is going to invert the phase to resolve a phase issue, and then a pad, which is reducing the output even more if the signal's too hot. The quality of a direct box usually has to do with the quality of the transformer, which is the thing that's actually doing the work. And then there's a whole world of boutique, expensive bass direct boxes. One of them is this Noble. And what's the difference between these two? This is doing all the same things, but this is adding features, right? Things like this are a direct box and a preamp, or direct box and a power supply, or direct box and tube driving, or EQ, right? You're adding features, and that's where the value is, or the cost is. That's where the cost is coming from. You have to decide for yourself if you think it's worth it or not, because you're getting into the creative realm of tone shaping and tone changing and tone coloring. So if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. That's actually the way you can most help out the channel, is by subscribing. A lot of the people that watch these videos don't actually subscribe. It would help me out a lot if you consider subscribing. The other thing you can do to help is check out the bass course. The link to that is in the description. It's a 2.5-hour course where we do a deep dive into 4-string bass. So if you're trying to get to the next level with your bass playing and you're not sure how, I think that resource could be really helpful for you, and that link is in the description. So thanks for hanging out, talking about direct boxes. More videos are on the way, and I can't wait to see what these things sound like.